He went out for a run as he did every day, a regular man in a regular neighborhood. But that morning, the silence of the streets was broken by something no one expected. His body was found hours later, lying beside a trail, his eyes still open as if searching for answers that would never come. No witnesses, no cameras, no traces. All that remained was a disturbing detail, the frozen expression of terror on the victim's face, as if, in his final moment, he had confronted something that none of us should ever see. This was the first piece of a dark puzzle, a murder with no apparent motive, no explicit violence, no clear clues, and yet something about the scene indicated that this was not an ordinary crime. The police labeled it an isolated case, but the residents knew something was wrong. Fear began to circulate like a shadow, and rumors quickly gained traction. Have you heard about the deadly secret? A phrase that spread like smoke, leaving the city on high alert. You might be wondering, why does this case attract so much attention even today? The answer lies in the details that most prefer to ignore. The crime scene seemed too clean. The victim's hands were crossed over his chest, as if someone had come back to arrange the body. No signs of struggle. No noises heard that night. No known enemies. Everything seemed so calculated. Have you ever experienced that? That feeling that something sinister is being hidden right before our eyes? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. This case didn't remain isolated for long. What seemed like a unique tragedy soon turned out to be the starting point of a sequence of dark events that left 3 victims, no answers, and a single suspect, dead before he could utter a single word. With him, perhaps the only chance to uncover the truth also vanished. But before all of this exploded, there was that first moment, that first loss, that first silence that no one could explain. This is where the spiral begins, because the truth is that great mysteries never start with fanfare. They disguise themselves as coincidence, hide in routines, and only later reveal the weight of something much larger. No one imagined that this was just the beginning, and it is here at this precise moment that we dive into the first act of a story where the absence of justice becomes the greatest punishment. Because sometimes what scares us most is not what happened, but what was never explained. And when stories like this are forgotten, the pain does not disappear. It only shifts places. It settles in the chest of those who remain, in the dusty files of the police station, in the gaze of a mother who still dreams of justice, and in some way also in the silence of those who watch, feel, but do not speak. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment about what has touched you so far. Have you ever experienced something similar? Does it remind you of someone? Or does it simply give you that strange feeling that something is wrong in the air? Your experience might echo in that of others watching this video right now. It could be the missing word for someone to understand that they are not alone in this feeling of emptiness. And if this type of content aligns with what you believe, please like the video. It may seem small, but it makes a giant difference in our ability to continue bringing stories that cannot be buried in forgetfulness. Your like shows YouTube that this topic matters, that it should reach more people, that this deadly secret needs to be heard by those who don't even know it exists. And of course, subscribe to the channel, because here, each video is made with care, research, and above all respect for those who lived, or still live, with unanswered questions. Your subscription is like a candle lit in this darkness. It gives us the breath to continue telling, investigating, questioning, and you are part of it. But this story, this is still far from over, because the next death changed everything, and that was when the pattern began to emerge. 2 weeks later, another body, another shock, another shattered family. The victim was now a 26-year-old woman found lifeless less than 3 kilometers from the location of the first murder. Just like in the previous case, there were no signs of forced entry, struggle, or any attempt at self-defense. The scene appeared carefully staged, as if someone had followed a precise script, controlling every detail, from the spot where the body was left to the arrangement of the objects around it. And the most disturbing part, once again, there were no witnesses. Neighbors heard no screams, and no cameras captured suspicious movements. It was as if the killer had passed unnoticed in broad daylight, or as if they knew exactly where all the blind spots in that area were. The pattern was starting to take shape, and still nothing was officially confirmed. No connections made by the police, no public acknowledgement of any links. But the public was beginning to notice. Would you spot the connection if you were there? 2 crimes, 2 victims, 1 invisible trail. The coincidences began to disturb. Both were long-time residents of the same area. They had predictable routines, discreet lives, and they were found in conditions too similar to ignore. The behind-the-scenes of the investigation remained a mystery to everyone, but among the whispers of the community, one certainty grew stronger. Someone was orchestrating, every step with chilling coldness. At this point, the mind begins to work on its own. People try to fill in the gaps, imagining what has not been said. Could it be someone from the very neighborhood, an acquaintance, a professional with knowledge of crime scene manipulation? Or could it be something even more complex, someone wanting to prove a point, send a silent message? The hidden truth seemed increasingly close, and yet unreachable. Now I want to delve even deeper into this matter, because when the second death occurred, it wasn't just fear that spread. It was the feeling that we were not facing isolated cases, but rather a dark construction that was slowly revealing itself. This transformation in collective perception was brutal. The city, once skeptical, walked in alert. Routines changed. People's mindsets began to mold to fear. Fear of being next, fear of never understanding why. And at this point, theories began to multiply. Some completely outlandish, driven by panic. Others chillingly plausible. One suggested that the victims were being chosen for something they had done in the past, as if someone was correcting invisible mistakes. Another proposed that it was all just a ruse, created to cover a much more personal, much more intimate motive. The impact of this on families and the city itself was profound. It was no longer just about death. It was about losing control, about not knowing where to step. It's here that you begin to understand that not every crime is merely an act of violence. Some are a silent manifesto, a muted scream hidden between the lines. And in this scenario, every detail matters. Every absence of evidence speaks louder than any proof, because sometimes what's not there is exactly what reveals the mind behind it all. Write in the comments, something is wrong in this silence. Her name was Clara, a public school teacher, known for her delicate way of speaking and for her insistence on reminding students that each one of them could have a different future. An ordinary woman, one of those who go unnoticed in the fast pace of the city. But it was precisely this simplicity that made her death even more shocking. The body was found in the classroom on an ordinary Friday morning before the students arrived. Everything was clean. Everything was quiet. Nothing was out of place except her irreplaceable absence. This time, it was impossible to hide it. The news spread in minutes. Reporters, cameras, sirens. What was once a whisper became a headline. Third death in less than 2 months, police still without answers. Outrage swept through social media, invaded neighborhood groups, sparked protests. But the strongest thing of all was the silence. The silence of the students, the silence of the principal, paralyzed in front of the door where Clara was found. The silence of the city, which could no longer sleep peacefully. And here is where the most painful question echoes. Could this third life have been saved? Because now the timeline was clear, the coincidences glaring, the pattern impossible to ignore. And yet, nothing was done. Clara, who didn't even know about the other 2 cases, may never have suspected she was being watched or chosen. The hidden truth is that justice does not always fail due to lack of resources. Sometimes it fails due to slowness, due to bureaucracy, or due to fear of admitting that it does not have the control it pretends to have. Now I want to delve even deeper into this matter, because when a tragedy repeats 3 times, logic changes. We are no longer facing an accident, not even a serial killer in the classical sense. We are facing a message, a sequence of cold, meticulous, possibly symbolic decisions. And this alters the entire mentality of the investigation. The behind the scenes begins to move with more tension, more urgency, more watchful eyes, and yet still no answers. The pain of Clara's family broke the veil of apathy. Her mother, in an interview, said with teary eyes, "My daughter didn't need to die for someone to pay attention." This phrase resonated like a choked scream in the throat of everyone following the case. The impact was devastating. On the streets, fear gave way to outrage. The neighbors began to gather, seeking alternatives, trying to protect themselves. But the feeling was that no one really knew what they were trying to protect themselves from. Then, the first disconnected clues emerged. Small pieces of evidence that had previously seemed insignificant, and that now, in light of the third death, took on a new shape. Objects out of place, conflicting schedules, messages that sounded trivial but, when analyzed carefully, suggested something deeper. A journey that perhaps had begun long before the first death and continued to unfold before everyone's eyes. Write in the comments, "She didn't need to die." His name came up as a whisper at first among investigators, then in the press. Raphael, 39 years old, IT technician, resident of the area for over a decade. Discreet, solitary, one of those who nobody really notices, but who always seems to be around. He had no criminal record, didn't attract attention, but it only took one vague connection to the second victim and a history of technical support at Clara's school to raise a red flag. Suddenly, Raphael stopped being just another face in Seoul, the crowd, and became the face everyone wanted to interrogate. The narrative formed too quickly. It was as if everyone wanted him to be guilty, because that would mean closing the cycle, restoring peace to the city, giving a name to the pain. But the more closely they looked, the more his image seemed to not fit. Raphael did not have a pattern of aggressive behavior, had no history of disturbances, and his alibis, though weak, were not disproven by concrete evidence. Still, the signs, however tenuous, began to stack up, like loose pieces being forced to create a puzzle. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because sometimes the desire to solve a mystery speaks louder than the pursuit of truth, and that changes everything. The investigation mindset becomes a minefield between public pressure, the thirst for answers, and the fear of making a mistake, or worse, of having already made one. Behind the scenes of the task force, sources diverged. Some said Raphael exhibited suspicious behavior, while others claimed he was being used as a distraction. And in the midst of this decision-making game, time was ticking, and the evidence was cooling. Raphael, on his part, maintained silence. Lawyer by his side, weary expression, and a single phrase repeated whenever questioned, "I didn't do anything." Was it convincing? Not exactly, but it also didn't sound like the speech of someone hiding a sinister plan. It was strange, uncomfortable, as if the truth were there, but in a place no one could point to clearly. The impact of this unresolved accusation was as strong as the crimes themselves. Public opinion became divided. Some wanted immediate justice, while others feared an irreversible injustice. This brings us to a delicate point in the journey. What happens when the investigation finds a name, but not an explanation? Raphael became a symbol. For some, the guilty party who wouldn't confess. For others, the scapegoat of a system desperate for closure. And it is precisely this ambiguity that makes everything denser. Because when doubt settles in, it erodes trust in institutions, in decisions, in processes. The revelation that everyone was waiting for, the confession, the motive, the conclusion, never came. Write in the comments, could it really have been him? Everything changed on a muggy Tuesday morning. Raphael was found dead in his apartment, doors locked from the inside, lights off, and a letter that said almost nothing. Just loose, disconnected phrases that confused more than they clarified. The news spread like wildfire. The only suspect was dead, and with him perhaps the only chance to tie up the loose ends of an investigation that was already fragmented. The question that wouldn't go away was no longer, who did this? But rather, did he do it? Raphael's death further divided the city. For some, it was the end. That's it. It was him. He killed himself out of guilt. For others, it was the beginning of a new nightmare. How can someone who was never judged, never confessed, be treated as the definitive guilty party? The transformation of public opinion was brutal. What once was fear turned into distrust. Distrust of the police, the media, the hastily told versions. It was as if a hidden truth was being buried alongside that body, and no one had the courage to face it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happens after the death of an untried suspect is something few understand. Justice hangs suspended in time. There is no confession, no trial, only hypotheses, silenced backrooms, and a pain with nowhere to rest. The collective mentality starts to fracture. The families of the victims feel they have lost twice, once due to the murder, and again for not knowing if that was truly the perpetrator. It's a suffocating feeling. An emptiness that doesn't allow for mourning, because mourning needs certainty. Interestingly, the letter left by Raphael seemed less like a plea for forgiveness and more like an echo of frustration. Words like guilt that isn't mine, no one will listen, I was chosen raised more questions than answers. Had he been silenced? Was he trying to say something that no one understood? Or was he just confused in collapse? The psychological impact of being accused of 3 murders without being able to truly defend himself can devastate any mind. But what if he knew too much? What if his death was not exactly a choice? It's at this point in the journey that truth ceases to be merely factual and transforms into something symbolic. Because Raphael's final silence did not close the case, on the contrary, it opened an abyss, a space where doubt reigns, where theories bloom, where pain spreads like an open wound. The collective feeling was one of impotence, of contained outrage, of something that was never clarified but was conveniently forgotten. Write in the comments, did the truth die with him? After Raphael's death, everything that seemed urgent was suspended. The investigators, who had previously given almost daily interviews, began to avoid the spotlight. The press, which fed theories with each new discovery, now repeated the same phrases with weary intonation. The case cooled. The evidence, once analyzed with surgical precision, began to be treated as pieces of a puzzle with a dubious shape. What didn't fit was ignored. What couldn't be proven was simply discarded. And so gradually the investigation lost momentum. The police station returned to its usual flow. Families, waiting for answers, had to deal with official silence. And the city? Well, the city began to pretend that nothing had happened. A kind of collective anesthesia took over the place. Yet behind this calmness, there was a constant tension, like a poorly healed wound throbbing inside. Behind the scenes, criminology experts disagreed. Some believed the guilty party had indeed been identified. Others raised the hypothesis of a second name that was never revealed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when justice stalls, pain does not stop. It transforms. It starts to occupy invisible spaces. The suspicious glance in the supermarket line, the silence between neighbors, the contained anger in neighborhood meetings, and in this fertile ground of uncertainties, speeches emerge that attempt to give shape to the void. Psychologists analyze the patterns, point out flaws in the investigated profile, highlight the absence of classic predatory behavior elements. And it is there that the rupture in the collective mentality begins, when the people start to wonder if everything was conducted in the right manner. The hidden truth, at this point, is no longer just in the case files. It is in what has not been documented, in the decision to ignore certain signs, in the lack of complementary expert analyses, in the questions that were never asked. The former expert in a recent interview even stated that the conclusions were rushed because there was fear that the case would become political. And this type of revelation, even if loose, causes a silent upheaval. The psychological impact of not trusting the system is profound. It strips people of the sense of safety, destabilizes the sense of justice, and worse, can lead to the truth being lost forever. The hardest part is that, over time, the case faded from collective memory. Not because it was resolved, but because it is easier to let it go than to deal with the discomfort of knowing that perhaps no one has truly paid for anything. The journey of the families became a kind of solitary resistance. The candles in the windows, the photos kept in the living room, the folders filled with newspaper clippings, Everything now belongs to a world that seems to have stopped while the rest simply moved on. Comment below. This pause hurts more than the truth. Time passed, but for the families of the victims, the clock stopped on the exact day they lost someone, not just because of the death, but due to the absence of meaning. Mrs. Estella still sets the coffee on the table every morning, as if Clara were about to arrive. "It's my way of remembering that she existed," she whispers. Meanwhile, Lucas's father, the first victim, still keeps his running shoes in the shoe rack, clean, as if waiting for another lap in the park. These small gestures say more than any technical report. They are attempts to keep alive a story that the world seems willing to erase. And this is where the cruelest dimension of this journey comes in, because while society moved forward, families remain trapped in a space where nothing resolves, where pain does not transform. There are no answers to give to the nieces and nephews who ask why their uncle disappeared. There is no sufficient explanation to justify the emptiness left by a son. The question that echoes in all these homes is always the same: how to move forward without knowing why. How to build a new life when everything you had has been ripped away for no reason, with no logic, no closure. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because these stories are not just about crimes. They are about emotional transformation. They are about the reconstruction of someone's identity when absence becomes the protagonist. And this doesn't appear in the newspapers. It's not in the case files. It's in the backstage of pain, in the unanswered letters, in the folded clothes that were never worn again, in the dates still marked on the calendar, but now with an unbearable silence surrounding them. These families have tried everything. They sought out journalists. They funded parallel investigations. They sought help from forensic psychologists. They sent open letters to the authorities. But the impact of fighting against forgetting is solitary, exhausting. It's like rowing against a tide that insists on taking everything away. And yet they persist, because giving up would, in some way, mean accepting that that life didn't matter. And there's no way to accept that. There's no way to swallow the idea that someone can disappear from history without leaving any plausible explanation. What's impressive is the strength with which these people resist, not out of anger, but out of love. Because every memory, they hold every picture on the shelf, every story recounted 1,000 times, is a way to keep alive the truth that has yet to come to light. And even though the spotlight has dimmed, they keep searching. Because deep down they all carry the same hope, that a new clue will appear, that someone will speak up, that a forgotten detail will resurface, that the journey will finally find a point of peace. Write in the comments, this pain cannot be forgotten. Over time, what remained were not proofs, but versions. Theories that emerged from the absence of official explanations, the gaps in testimonies, the overlooked details, that when added up, seemed to scream for attention. One of the most discussed theories claimed that the victims shared something that never came to light, an event from the past, an old secret, something buried so deep that only those willing to dig very hard would find it. Another theory spoke of symbolic motivation, deaths that represented a kind of message, perhaps addressed to someone who never understood the message. There were also those who believed that everything was part of a mental game orchestrated by someone who knew human behavior well, someone adept at manipulating fear, erasing traces, leaving just enough to confuse. A kind of invisible predator, faceless but with an invisible signature that no one could decipher. It's at this point that the void gains strength, because what is not explained is interpreted. And the danger of interpretations is that, even without evidence, they shape realities. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because these theories, even without confirmation, reveal something about how we deal with the unknown. They show how the mind seeks patterns, how we try to impose logic on chaos, how we refuse to accept that perhaps we simply don't know. The hidden truth might not be in a lost document or a hidden testimony, but in our inability to admit that certain questions have no immediate answers. And this requires an internal transformation, to exchange the obsession for swift justice for a journey that is slower, more sensitive, more conscious. Even among the investigators themselves, some admitted quietly, Maybe we've been looking too hard in the wrong direction. A phrase that got lost in the background but for some makes perfect sense. Could it be that, from the beginning, the truth was in front of our eyes, but the desire to wrap up the case blinded us? Or was that always the plan? To distract, confuse, divert. In one report, a handwritten marginal note said, "Connect with the other two," and still without concrete evidence. This phrase was never explained. It never gained prominence. But those who read it didn't forget, and perhaps that is the most unsettling point of this entire story. The possibility that everything we need to understand has already been shown, but in such subtle, disguised ways that it went unnoticed. Because the truth, sometimes, doesn't hide in distant places. It camouflages itself in routine, in automatic gestures, in decisions that seemed harmless. Write in the comments, did we not see because we didn't want to see? If you made it this far, it's because something in this story truly touched you, and that's why I want to invite you to continue this journey with me. We know that dealing with cases like this requires more than just information. It requires empathy, a keen eye, and above all, courage to face what many prefer to ignore. If this content resonated with you, if it sparked reflection, if it gave you that feeling that these stories cannot be forgotten, subscribe to the channel. Here, every video is made with the same care, with the same intention of diving deep, where very few are willing to go, and since you've stayed with me until the end, comment below, "I stayed until the last second." This way, I know you're truly with me in this search for answers that still need to be told. Also, leave your like, not as an automatic gesture, but as a sign that this type of content is valuable to you. This helps me keep this space alive, active, and relevant. And if you want to keep thinking, feeling, and investigating with me, there's a video right next to this one that complements this subject. Click and continue over there. I'll be waiting for you.